Our next and final point in the sequence is tangible ways to communicate vision and mission of competing biblically within a program or an organization. What are tangible ways? Well, we discussed previously how critical it is to be conscious of the principle of Deuteronomy 6, that you talk about stuff which has to do with your mouth and your hearing, and that you see stuff which has to do with writing in invisible places. We've talked about that at length. And I just want to review that is one of the tangible ways. We're talking about how-tos. Just want to revisit the issue that's one of them we've addressed previously, but I want to address it again, that be visible and that you pound the philosophy with their eyes, you pound it into their ears with your confession, and you get them to speak it. We're always struck, those of us in sports, you'll hear somebody interviewed, and you'll know what the organization's philosophy is, and they'll just say, we call it this. They just keep saying the company line. The company line is a repeat of what that organization's mission statement is, or their vision is, however you want to use those terms. Well, it's the next game. It's about the next game. It's not about last game. It's about the next game. You'll hear them say it over and over, and you'll realize, wait a minute, that was a learned response. It was learned because the coaches or the overseers or the parents, right, that they say that so much that eventually those under, it's no different than a parent. I mean, how many times have we as adult kids remember ourselves saying things that our parents said or doing things like our parents did? We might not even have liked it. We might even said, we'll never do that when we grow up, but we repeat it. It's fascinating. So what you see over and over and over, you tend to repeat. And what you hear over and over, you tend to remember and you kind of articulate. I mean, we joke about different sayings that we say and how those we serve or mentor or disciple say the same things. This is part of the reproduction process, that if you see it or hear it or say it enough, it becomes you. That can be either good or bad, but that's a fact of how the human psyche and mind and works. And so when you post things, when you post them, when you speak about them, when you verbalize them, when you have them verbalize them back to you, the chances are greater that they ingrate. It's true even with the Word of God. If I look at the Word and read it, it affects my eyes. If I speak it, it affects my mouth and my ears. I'm seeing it with my eyes. I'm speaking it with my mouth. I'm hearing it with my ears. I'm touching it with my hands. The chance that the Word of God's going to stick is if I involve more senses. So what we're trying to do in terms of this philosophy is speak it, hear it. I've already said it. Speak it, hear it, see it, and use every opportunity possible to make that a fundamental way, a tangible way that you can communicate vision. The second way in terms of communicating vision is just encouragement, right? Encouragement, which is part and parcel of the philosophy, is that we want to use words to build up. And an incredible way that I found just by learning by accidental experience was writing people written notes. It's one thing to say something to him. It's one thing to say, good job. I remember a coach saying this to me one time. I still can remember it, though it happened in 1978. He said to me in a lifting session after something happened where I did something that struck him. He said, I'm going to name my first son after you. Isn't it fascinating that that's something I remember from 1978? How many years later is that? 30, 40, 50 years later? Is that 50 years later? Nope. 40 years later, I remember a coach saying something I can still remember him saying. That's the power of words. I can remember curses that were spoken to me, and I can remember buildups that were spoken to me. That's the power of words. And writing notes we've found, it's one thing to get a text, and some people save them. It's one thing to get an email. You can save them. But a written note, there's something to it that's powerful. A touch is powerful. I can remember coaches that put their hand on my shoulder, and my first thought was, he loves me. Fascinating. He believes in me. He likes me. He touched me in a certain way that made me feel familiar, family. And I remember that. I can tell you the coach's name right now. It's just, you have these instances that you have an experience as somebody who was young, could have been 23, who was young, were an adult or an overseer or somebody you respect, said something, did something. Touch, words, written, spoken, they have tremendous power, and we have to work at using them. We talk about put-ups. Put-ups are verbal things that put somebody up. It's a paraphrase of of Ephesians 4:29 about let no unwholesome word come out of your mouth, but only what will build others up. So sometimes people would call them positive words. Well, we consider it more than just positive talk. And it's good job, good job. Good job doesn't have as much meaning as the way you ran to the ball on that play, the way that you finished that game, your attitude in that situation that was hard is much better than saying good job. Again, the more specific you are and the more authentic you are, the more it's something from your heart, has more impact than if it's just words that are flippant. Good job, I'd rather hear good job than bad job. I'd rather hear good job than nothing. But I can say good job in a different way that has more impact. That's a learned behavior. From your mentors, from those that have gone before you, you can learn what you want to reproduce and what you don't want to reproduce. God willing, we reproduce the things that we have experienced or seen to have powerful benefit. I know when somebody's weeping and they look me in the eye and say, thank you, they don't have to say much. Their emotional action or response supercharges the words. They don't have to say anything. If they weep, if there's emotion, if there's touch involved, it is powerful impact. Powerful. So now we're talking about the power of touch, the power of words, the power of tears, the power of written. Here's what I learned in coaching one time, is on Sunday nights, when we were meeting about the ball game that was played on Saturday, there were oftentimes in the coaches' meeting, which went for 5 hours, there were oftentimes where it didn't involve me. They were having a discussion, it didn't involve me. And I'd have a roster of the players right here, and I would write a note to every player. I'd write it was we call it a one-liner. And I tried to be specific. I didn't just say good job. I said, I loved hearing you cheer on the sideline. Fantastic job running the ball. I want to name, this is jokey, but kind of, I want to name my first son after you, right? Something that makes them smile and think. It may be a jokey deal. It's not going to be sarcastic. And I did this. And I made sure that every other week, everybody got at least one note from me. And I'd stick it in their locker. So I'd go around the locker room. I cut off all these slips of paper. I took a 8x11 sheet and I scissored it and I cut it into quadrants. There's 8 little notes. And I'd fold them up and I'd stick them in their locker. And I thought, it's a good thing to do. I thought this is a good thing to do. And then at the end of the year, that first year I did that, we were cleaning out lockers. And I found all the notes saved by guys. Not every guy, but regularly I ran across a note that was taped on their locker. Something I said to them. To me, it was 5 seconds of just doing something I thought would be good. To them, it meant something enough that they saved it, that they posted it, that they reviewed it. That's when I was struck. That's my epiphany of the power of the words as a coach or a parent. That I could have said something which may or may not have impact, but when it was written, there was something about the note that had longevity to it that was different than words. Obviously, I told you some stories of things I remember hearing that I can still hear clearly in my brain 40 years later. But the chance of that being lost when it's a verbal word is greater than when it's a written word. And the chance that it comes, we all know that. If you get an email versus a written letter, letters are not even normative nowadays. People don't even write anymore. They email, they text, etc. When you get a handwritten note versus a typed note, it has different impact. When that handwritten note has saying something meaningful, or a blessing, or what we call a put-up. A put-up is just a blessing. You're blessing somebody by building them up or putting them up. So practically, in practice is what we would do when we're teaching kids how to be verbal in putting each other up, considering other better than themselves. This really happens. We'd say in this next 10-minute period, I want you to give 3 put-ups to somebody on the team that happens in this next drill period. 3 put-ups. And at the end of 10 minutes, we're going to come back together and we're going to debrief about what it felt like when you gave the put-up and what it felt like that you received the put-up. Make sure the put-up is specific. The more specific, instead of just saying nice job, way to do that, the more specific, the more impact. Don't be corny. Be serious. Let's work at that. And we did this regularly. We would have put-up sessions during practice, a small window of time that we'd ask them, we'd make them do it And then we debrief. I was struck. Again, this is another experience where I'm like, whoa, that was a bigger deal than I thought. I was struck and they were struck. I'd say, how did you feel when that player said that to you? It made me feel good. It made me feel really good. It enhanced his experience. It connected him with his friend. That guy said something meaningful to me, and now I feel better about him. Does that make sense? So in a sense, you're building intimacy through a simple little, it's not a game, through a simple little engaging process. You teach them how to climb outside themselves, right? Care about somebody else. Use their mouth, big deal, power of words, to say something that enhances them as a person or their regarding their performance, something. And everybody wins. And so that's how you created a culture of put-ups. That's how you created cross-pollination. That people said, maybe it's, we're going to say something to the other side. If you're on offense, you're going to do it on defense. If you throw the discus, you're going to say it to a sprinter. You're going to travel outside your circle and bless somebody with a one-liner put-up. And then we'll stop and debrief. Who got 3 done? I did. Who didn't get 3 done? 2. How do you feel about that? What are we going to do different next time? And who did more than 3? I did 5 or 6. I did it every play. That would be cool. Now you create a culture of putting people up instead of nothing or putting people down. This is how you create a climate of that. That's what put-ups are. Rainbow signs. Another example. Rainbow signs are literally signs on butcher paper, let's say. That's how we grew up with them. That had used multiple colors, and somebody created them within this team organization that I played in. And whenever somebody themselves or in their family had something happen that was really good or really bad, they created a sign. And on that sign, it had a rainbow. That's why I call them rainbow signs. And it had some drawings. It might have a cross on it. And then it had some encouraging or positive comment about whatever happened that was bad or good, meaning somebody maybe died in their family, or they had a difficulty, or somebody's in the hospital. And so these rainbow signs were created either because of the players or the players' families. If it was a player's family and they were far away, they'd create the sign. And the kicker was that every player signs it. So at the end of team meetings, regularly, there was a table out there with 2, 3, 4, 5 signs that somebody outside the program in the outer circle put together. And there were a bunch of felt pens there. And then people would either sign their name and their number, or they'd sign a note. And sometimes, depending on the relationship with the person, you wouldn't know Johnny's uncle in Portland. And so you might just sign your name, might say, "Get well, thinking about you." It's amazing the impact of rainbow signs on people. I personally, even as a coach and as a player, got 2 or 3 rainbow signs that I still have. And I have a memory associated with it that's very encouraging and enhancing. To us, they just come out of, to the players, they come out of the meeting, they put their name and the number. But when somebody who's never been part of this philosophy, that's in the hospital or has a serious illness, or there was a death in the family, when they get mailed or sent a sign like that with players writing something, hopefully more than just their name or number. Sometimes they wrote a lot, sometimes they wrote a little, and you get this big sheet of paper. When we go to hospital rooms, they'd be taped to the walls. Somebody at home would tape them to the wall of their house. To us, it takes 5 seconds. To them, it becomes a lifelong memory. So we learn about leveraging put-ups, whether it's through rainbow signs or little notes or big signs in the locker room, to enhance an experience, to build relationship horizontally, to draw people to Jesus vertically. Phenomenal impact. Takes a little bit of time, because the guy who has to put together the sign, right? Happened to be generally a gal who was one of the family of the coaching staff. Historically, there were a number of people that did it in this particular program, and it was unbelievable. But you had to educate your guys to make it authentic, to not just do a simple little thing, to realize somebody's going to receive that who's hurting or encouraged, and this is going to bless them. Of course, when you get a sign, you realize the impact, and then forever you take signs more seriously because you saw what it did to you or somebody close to you. When you saw how your mother or father, brother, sister, uncle, and aunt responded to the team creating a rainbow sign for them, then it engaged you deeper in how valuable that particular act was as an enhancer within the philosophy of competing biblically. That sign didn't have anything to do with the game or the practice. It had to do with a culture that was always creatively thinking about how they could enhance people and build people up. And the team experience then affected the outer circle in a dramatic way, which is part of the philosophy, because our target is eternity, and we're trying to glorify God and build people up for evangelism or discipleship so they come to Jesus or grow in Jesus. And these were tools that we learned. Another one is what's called the afterglow. I'll finish with that. It's a post-game gathering started historically in Pacific Lutheran University. This concept comes from Frosty Westering. And he does it more and better and different than anything I've ever seen anywhere. And the only people I know who approximate it are people that have somehow been a son or daughter of the program, or knew somebody who was, or somehow was touched by it. And during that time, generally the coach comes together and makes some statements. And there's a bunch of ways to do it. You can do it however creatively and deeply widely you want to do it. It started with just players in the locker room talking about the game and taking time to put each other up. Coaches would put up players. Players would put up coaches. That's a one-liner. That'd be coach and say, anybody have any put-ups here? And Johnny would talk about Steve, and Billy would talk about Bobby, and this coach would talk about this player, and this player would talk about the coach. And they'd spend, frankly, from 30 minutes to an hour and a half after the contest in the locker room with the inner circle, putting each other up and blessing each other. Win or loss, community. And then eventually some of the fathers and parents came, and then evolved to where the parents came from the beginning, and family and friends. And then it turned out to be hundreds of people. And then they reached a point in the program where you lost the intimacy because the inner circle had no special time anymore. It was always a combination of the inner and the outer circle. It compromised the experience of the inner circle, and so they decided to have two. And so after every game, the players would immediately go in the locker room, or if it's an away game, they might go into the stands, or they might sit on the field, depending on the weather, and they'd have a private put-up session with the team in the locker room, and then they'd publicly go out to some location, depending on the weather, and have a public afterglow or locker room, post-game locker room. And it evolved from what's called the post-game locker room to afterglow in this setting at Pacific Lutheran. Now, I was there in the beginning when it was players only and a few dads, and I coached there when it was the players and the families together. And then I came back at a point where they'd evolved to having a private inner circle in the locker room and then a public one after that. And when they were in away games, they didn't do the private and the public. Well, that's not true. Sometimes they had a shorter one with the players, and then they went out to see the fans. Sometimes in an away game, it was always only in the stands with everybody there, hundreds of people. And at home games, they would have a private locker room, and the fans would all go back to the campus. This is 8-10 miles away. And they'd have coffee and cookies, and they'd wait for an hour or more in the field house until the player locker room was done, the afterglow, and then they'd go back to the campus, shower, and then come back and meet with the parents and the family and the friends. And you could have a game that ended at 3:45. And by the time the players got back to campus and the families and friends were there, you didn't get out of that until 6:30. Can you imagine? 6:45, I remember sometimes. Can you imagine having a football game that starts at 1 and the experience ends at 6:45? And nobody was in a hurry to go, win or lose, because the kinds of things that happen in terms of intimacy and impact within a afterglow or a post-game locker room with the inner circle, and it happened in the outer circle. People came to Jesus because of that. People considered Christ because of that. People have lifelong memories of things that happened at the afterglow. Now, at some level, the coach or the coaches said a few things, and the players said a few things, and then they offered the parents or any outer circle people who wanted to comment. It's unbelievable. It frankly is unprecedented in my experience. And it was more powerful than the game itself, because the afterglow or the post-game locker room was a response to what happened during that window of competition. But it was things unrelated to performance. It wasn't like they talked about all the best plays. They talked about some player who had an interaction with an opponent, or an opponent and interaction, or player with player interaction, or an interaction with somebody in the outer circle, a fan or a referee, or something that was impressed them about the way a player handled something. They were put-ups, public, in the inner circle, or put-ups, public, in the outer circle, inner circle combination. I hope I'm describing this correctly. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. We do it everywhere that anybody's willing to consider it because lives have been changed. Frosty's attitude was this. Some of these parents only come to one game a year because they're coming from out of the area. If we're only together 10 or 11 times a year for only 3 or 4 years of experience, let's milk it. He didn't use that terminology. Let's use this opportunity to enhance the experience by caring and sharing and crying and laughing and finding out who has birthdays and singing birthday songs and putting each other up. Let's come out of this experience with an incredible value-driven thing way beyond the game, certainly way beyond the scoreboard, win, lose, or draw. It's phenomenal. Again, these are tangible ways to communicate the vision of competing biblically. The post-game locker room afterglow was the most distinct and rare and unique of anything. Rainbow signs I've never seen anywhere else except this one program. Put-ups were a priority emphasized, and they did it better than anybody, or their spiritual sons or daughters that reproduced this in other programs. We've talked about that. Encouraging notes in lockers. There's people, anybody can do that. Signs posted on walls and sayings. People do that to a small degree. We're encouraging people to do that at an aggressively fierce degree so they can enhance the philosophy of being reproduced, ingrained, transformative, and reproduced in the future.